Greetings fellow humans, my name is Alistair Lord and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. Today I'd like to talk to you about a little bit of background, and really it's kind of philosophy related to this idea of a metta meditation, because I feel that it's necessary to have a certain understanding of why you're doing it before we get into the how of doing it. So I like to mention some of the sources before I go into the video. So there's 3 YouTubers who I follow, and I found some of their work to be extremely useful for developing some of these ideas. So one of them is Emerald at the Diamond Net, and she talks a lot about Jungian shadow work. Another one is Aaron Doughty, and a third is Mark Queppet, and he calls himself UniversalMan on YouTube, and I'll be talking about his Metascript method. So first of all, what is this word metta? Well, it's transliterated into English M-E-T-T-A, and it comes from the Pali language, and it's normally translated as loving kindness. So metta with a double T is quite different from the English word meta, M-E-T-A, single T. You could do a meta-analysis of research, for example. So these are 2 completely different uses of the word metta. The word sounds the same, but the meanings are quite different. So metta comes from Pali. It's normally translated as loving kindness. Now, there's different ways that you can do a metta meditation. And what I'm going to talk about tomorrow is the kind of simpler form where you're doing this loving kindness towards yourself. Now, there are different versions where you'll start projecting loving kindness to yourself and then you'll radiate it out. So you might start by radiating it out to friends and family, people you love, then acquaintances who you get on with, and then you might go out to people who you're neutral towards, people who you bump into at work but you don't really know them, and then you might even start projecting loving kindness to people who you don't like, people you have an aversion to, people you hate perhaps. So in my own case, that might be, say, Tony Blair, because he is absolutely my least favourite politician on planet Earth. Although I wouldn't say I hate him, because, hate is a very strong emotion, and if you're putting your time and energy into hating people, well, you've got a bit of a problem, and I would suggest that you should put your time and energy into doing something different, such as loving yourself. So there's the shorter version where you're projecting loving kindness to yourself, and there's a longer version where you're radiating it out to other people, and I'm just going to talk about the shorter version tomorrow. So before I start talking about some of these YouTubers who I referenced at the beginning, I want to talk a bit about the English language and where I think there's a problem with some of its language. So, for example, if you were to say, oh, that guy John, he really loves himself, this has a really negative connotation in English, because what we normally mean when we say that somebody loves themselves is we mean it in a narcissistic way, and it has a very negative connotation. But actually, to love yourself in a non-narcissistic way is an incredibly beautiful thing. Because let's face it, there's plenty of people walking around on planet Earth who hate themselves. They're always punishing themselves over perceived things that they've done. They think of themselves as stupid, and they have all these negative patterns of behavior because they hate themselves. Now, I would suggest that these people need a profound healing. And one of the ways they can do this profound healing is with a metta meditation. So loving kindness, it is a positive thing that you're feeling love towards yourself as a human being who is deserving of happiness and friendship and positive things. So this is very different from a kind of narcissistic love. Why would we want to do a metta meditation to generate loving kindness for ourselves? Well, a lot of it relates to Jungian shadow work. And one of the YouTubers who I like watching, as I mentioned earlier, is called Emerald at the Diamond Net. And she makes lots of videos about Jungian shadow work. And there was one that particularly resonated with me. And I watched it and it was like, it made complete sense to me, to my reasoning mind. But it also made complete sense to me emotionally. And in my experience, when you understand something with your reason, with your brain, and you understand it in a very similar way emotionally with your heart, then you are right. And if you get the feeling with your brain and your mind working together that you should go along a particular path, even though it might seem quite bizarre, then you should go down that path. Because when your brain and your heart are telling you the same thing, you are almost certainly right about whatever it is. So she made this video and she was talking about masculine wounds and feminine wounds that people usually get in childhood. I mean, you can get them in adolescence and you can get them as an adult, but many of us get them in childhood. And they show up later in life as negative patterns of behavior. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma, and I'm going to talk about it in two distinctly different ways. So there's clinical trauma, which causes post-traumatic stress disorder, and that might be caused by sexual abuse, it might be caused by growing up in a war zone. And then there's like everyday trauma. Now this everyday trauma isn't going to cause PTSD, but it may well generate and feed some of these negative patterns of behavior that we all develop as children and then to a lesser or greater degree stick with or don't in adulthood. So all of us get masculine wounds and feminine wounds, and some of them may cause clinical trauma and some of them may not. And normally we'll tend to get more of one than the other. And one of the things about Jungian shadow work, specifically healing yourself, is to transform these wounds into scars. So they're no longer open and causing you problems. They've healed up and you've learned the lesson that they were there to teach you. Now, one of the YouTubers who I mentioned earlier is a guy called Doughty, and he talks about his past, his childhood in quite a number of his videos. And he talks about how his stepmother was a narcissist and he primarily got feminine wounds. So he was a man who got mostly feminine wounds as a child. Now, in my own case, my father was diagnosed with cancer when my mother was pregnant with me. I'm the last of 3 children. And he died when I was 14. So he was struck down with cancer when he was 30, and it made him very angry. And, you know, it made for a problematic childhood in certain respects in my own life. Although actually looking back, I don't think I got clinical trauma. You know, I didn't grow up with post-traumatic stress disorder. But I picked up his pattern of anger and I internalized it myself. So in my own case, I got primarily masculine wounds in childhood, not feminine wounds in the case of Doughty. And, you know, I'll just come out and say it. I am a recovering anger addict. You know, I've had an anger management problem since I was a child. What are you going to do? In my own case, I decided to deal with it because it got to a certain point in my life, it was causing me problems, and I thought, I don't want to go on like this. I know I better deal with it. So I did, you know, and I've made quite a lot of progress with my anger. It doesn't come out like it used to do. You know, there's still work to be done, you know, because most of us are indeed a work in progress. But I had a fairly good idea of what my patterns were, and I decided that I wanted to deal with it. And if you're going to do Jungian shadow work, these two things are essential. Understanding the patterns and making the decision to deal with it. So another thing that Emerald at the Diamond Net talked about in this video when she was talking about masculine wounds and feminine wounds was she said there's a masculine path of healing and there's a feminine path of healing. And I have to say this makes complete sense to me, and they are quite distinctly different. So I'm going to talk about the masculine path of healing first, because the feminine path is related to the Metta meditation. So the masculine path of healing is about understanding. So in my own case, there were a number of things that helped me understand my anger, why it was there and how it occurred. And one of those things was I went into counselling about 6 years ago. I learned a lot of things about myself. And then last year I went into counselling again. And again, I found it very useful for understanding some of my own triggers and understanding some of my patterns of behaviour so I could begin to deal with them. Now, counselling wasn't the only part of my masculine path of healing that I needed. I spoke with my aunt, who's the only person alive who knew my father as a child, and I got some information from her, and I read a lot of books about Jungian shadow work, and I started doing different forms of meditation and getting in touch with my own inner child. Another thing that I did, which I found extremely useful, and this is both related to my feminine and my masculine path of healing, although primarily my masculine path of healing, is I started keeping a journal. And there were two parts of that journal which I'll talk about in a little bit of detail. The first is the gratitude journal, and the second is the Metascript method. So with a gratitude journal, you write about things that you're grateful for. So it could be on this particular day that your mother phoned you up and you had a pleasant conversation with your mother. You write about how thankful you are for your mother, and you can go into lots of detail or only a little bit of detail as you like. Or it might be some friend helped you out with a favour. You write about how you appreciate that particular friend and your friends in general. You could write about how you appreciate having a roof over your head. You can write about how you're grateful that there's food in your kitchen. You can write about how you're grateful that water comes out of your tap. You can write about all sorts of things. It could be things, it could be people. So this generates a feeling of positivity and gratefulness to the universe. Now, I also use something called the Metascript method, and I downloaded a free PDF from Mark Queppet's website. Mark Queppet, he calls himself UniversalMan on YouTube, and I found his Metascript method to be extremely useful. Now, I'm not going to go into details here because basically, if you're interested, go and download his PDF, read it, and start implementing it in your own life. I may talk about it a little bit, how I used it in future videos, but not here. And basically, I started writing about my anger when it showed up, because there would be some times where an incident would happen and I wouldn't get angry. And I reflected on it later and I'm like, normally, a couple of years ago, I would have got angry then, but I didn't. Why? And I would write about what happened just before, what happened just after. And other times I would lose my temper and I would write about it. And using this particular Metascript method. Now, after a certain amount of time, when I looked at my journals, I could see particular patterns emerging. And this is the thing about keeping a journal, is it helps you see the patterns in your own life. And when you understand those patterns, you can make change much easier. So going into counselling and using the Metascript method, for me, were two very important parts of my masculine path of healing. And the masculine path of healing is about understanding. Now, one of the limitations about the masculine path of healing is you're never, ever, ever going to get all the information that is possibly available. It just isn't going to happen that you're going to have 100% of the jigsaw pieces. Now, you might be looking at the jigsaw of your life, the jigsaw of your childhood, whatever, and you might only have, I don't know, 60%, 70%, 80% of the pieces. Some of the pieces you're just not going to get, and you just have to accept that. But despite the fact that you're never going to get all of the pieces of the jigsaw of your childhood or of your life, it is still an incredibly useful way of understanding what happened to you, understanding the patterns of behavior that you have, and then changing them. The feminine path of healing, in contrast, is not about understanding, it's about unconditional love. Now, with the feminine path of healing, it is not necessary to understand why something happened. Now, perhaps you were sexually abused as a child by an uncle or a family friend or something, and you really don't understand why. And this person is not willing to talk to you, or this person is dead, and you simply, there's no way of getting the information about why they did this. So that part, the masculine path of healing, of understanding that incident, is closed to you. In which case, you have to use the feminine path of healing. And as I say, with the feminine path of healing, it is absolutely not necessary to understand why something happened. The only thing that you need with the feminine path of healing is to generate unconditional love for yourself and project it to the wounds that you have so that you can heal those wounds. And one of the ways of using the feminine path of healing is to do a metta meditation. And in tomorrow's video, I will explain how I use metta meditation in my own life. Thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.